The Lord be with you. Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus appeared to the 11 and said to them, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not believe will be condemned. These signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons. They will speak new languages. They will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not harm them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover." Gospel of the Lord. There are three separate testimonies that Paul gave about his conversion, which agree in just about every detail. Paul was a man who was on a mission. The first aspect of his mission was to put anybody in jail who believed in Jesus. So it was on one of his trips to arrest people that he was knocked down, blinded by a light, and he saw Jesus. Now, mind you, Jesus was risen from the dead and had ascended into heaven. So Paul had never worked with Jesus. He was not one of the 12. But this experience completely changed him to the point where, as the story tells us, he was blind for a while, and scales fell from his eyes, which was symbolic of coming to the faith. He was baptized, and he became a man who was on a mission to bring people to Christ. Now, the thing about St. Paul, which is extremely important, besides his having written about half of the New Testament, is that he took our religion out of its Jewish straitjacket and he brought it onto the world stage. Paul, for example, he writes, it's not the Jewish law that saves, which is true. And it's not circumcision, which of course was part of the Jewish religion. It's Jesus. He's the Savior. And Paul was completely convinced of this. Now, he wasn't just a man who saw a vision. We hear about visionaries. He actually saw Jesus. Now, interestingly enough, Paul's writings only exceptionally quote Jesus, because he never really worked with him, but he knew enough to be able to produce beautiful theology. Who is Jesus Christ? Paul's the first one to give us the understanding that from the very earliest days of the church there was Mass, because Paul said in Corinthians that we do what has been handed on to us, namely the night before Jesus died, he took bread and blessed it, broke it, said, "This is my body." So this was before any of the Gospels were written, so the church was already established. Paul set up churches throughout the Mediterranean world. He was a missionary. He had three great missionary trips all around the Mediterranean, and part of it was enabled by Roman roads. The Romans were a great road construction people, and the Mediterranean. One can cover many miles on a ship. So he set churches up throughout the Mediterranean, in modern-day Greece and other areas. He wrote to churches. His letter to the Ephesians means the church at Ephesus. Ephesus was in now what we call Turkey. And he talked about the need for Jesus. He talked about resurrection, which was not part of the Jewish religion, of course. And he inspired countless people. He still does. Now, Paul was the first one to bring the gospel into Europe. He came into Europe, which was Greece at the time. That was the beginning of it. And he went down the peninsula, to Thessalonica, a letter to the Thessalonians. He wrote letters because once he left a place, he would hear about things that happened. So he would send a letter back to the place. Often there were difficulties, controversies, what to do about this or that or the other thing, and Paul would write a letter. So even from the earliest days, there were difficulties in the church. There's nothing new about that. But still, Paul did everything he could to support the faith, defend the faith, and bring many people to God. The greatest thing Paul did was he saved Christianity from extinction. And the reason we can say that was because before Paul, Christianity was basically a Jewish movement, meaning it was confined to a very narrow sliver of the world. And people had this idea that you had to be Jewish in order to become a Christian. Now, in the year 49, there was a famous council called the Council of Jerusalem, where the decision was made that anybody who wanted to become a member of the church did not have to become Jewish first. And that set the stage for what we would have as the church became worldwide. So non-Jews could enter into the faith. So when Jesus said, baptize and teach all nations, the 12 apostles really weren't in a position to be able to do that because they were pretty much locked into just to the Jewish side of things. Paul comes along and frees up the people, frees up the faith for the entire world. And most of us have European ancestry. So we go back in time. We had ancestors who worshiped stars, rocks, and trees that were pagans. But somewhere along the line, there was a missionary. So the first great missionary was St. Paul. So this is a great blessing. Our faith is primarily interpersonal. I mean, we can read things, we should study, we should think, we need to pray. But other people, it could be parents, others, spouses, whatever, who help us to understand Jesus. The greatest Bible that has ever been written is not so much the Bible that we have, 72 books. It's the people of God. So, God didn't send the book, and I'm not putting down the book's important, but he sent his son, flesh and blood, human nature. And this son was the one who inspired Paul to completely give up his old ways, turn to the truth. Paul labored diligently. He was shipwrecked, beaten a number of times, left for dead, imprisoned. In fact, I saw one of his prisons. Modern-day prisons, of course, have bars, electronically activated. The prisoners are let out. They go to eat or whatever. In the Mamertine prison in Rome, where Paul was, the prisoners were staked. You were chained to a stake. So it was a very difficult thing. Paul ended up eventually being beheaded, and supposedly his head bounced 3 times. So there are 2 churches in Rome. St. Paul's outside the walls, which is the major basilica, where his body was rediscovered, his tomb, back in 2008. And then Paul at the 3 Fountains, where supposedly that was the place where he was beheaded. So the other commemoration of Paul is June the 29th. We celebrate him with St. Peter and Paul. So the church moved from Jerusalem to Syria to Rome. That's where Peter and Paul ended up. And that's where the center of the church is to this day.